I'm dressed very formally for this recording. In my suit.
I'm in my pyjamas.
Oh, yeah, I'm in a suit.
Yeah.
I'm dressed as I'm in my Mr. Sneed cosplay.
Yeah.
Actually,
Go on, do his line. Do his best line.
Hello, I'm Mr. Sneed. Can I
his
help
best
you
line.
find a Welsh policeman called Andy? No, what
It's
is
too
it?
early for Andy. His best line, obviously. The stiffs are getting lively again.
Oh, the stiffs are getting lively again.
That's from the version that they couldn't show to children.
That's called the
The
loud
version
bed.
they planned to do after the watershed. This is a fun thing to consider. This could be a fun thing to consider for every episode. If you were allowed to insert the word precisely once into this episode, where would it go?
Bleeping it, so make it confusing. I think as soon as Gwyneth steps in the arch, and she dies.
That would be a good one.
It would change the course of the episode. It wouldn't need to have all that last 15 minutes of faff. It would just, Yeah. Or maybe if Sneed's about to have his neck snapped. That's also good.
Yeah. I think my submission would be the Doctor saying, "No, I'm going to die in a dungeon in Cardiff."
I think, to be honest, the best one would be when the Mrs. don't remember her name, but when the Gelf-possessed old lady is in the audience, and then instead of screaming, she just lets out one very loud. Charles Dickens is like, I've never heard such language before. Me, popular author Charles Dickens, if you hadn't got it already. I think they probably said Mr. Dickens already at that point. I'm Simon Callow, he says.
Yeah, he shouts out Simon Callow as his first line.
I'd want Dickens to say,
yeah.
That's going to go, I don't know where this can go. It'll go somewhere. Hello, people, and welcome to Always Foolish, a positive Doctor Who podcast. It's me, David, and my co-host, Tom.
Tom, hello.
I'm pointing kind of off in the direction that you might be.
Yeah.
I mean, a long way away.
I can't sense it, but I'm getting the good vibes.
Can't feel
that's
me
all right.
vaguely pointing in your direction 200 miles away.
I mean, if I could, then that would be an ability that I'd have to take to
it's
science.
Pretty bad ability. It's not very useful. It's just me.
We could be used for long distance communication, but to be fair, we've already got long distance communication.
It's like if you're stuck
days.
in a jail cell though, and you've not got access to anything, but you get the SOS by just on and off if they're pointing at you.
Yeah, but that does require one of us to be stuck in a jail cell and the other one to know exactly where we are.
Some skills and items are only useful in certain scenarios. Being an explosives expert is very useful if you're trying to break out of a prison, but less useful if you run an ice cream shop.
I don't know. Have you seen Oppenheimer yet? There's a bit there where he's running an ice cream shop and he
does
really? Marvels. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
And Marvel is in it as well. Captain Marvel. Very exciting.
No, Oppenheimer plays Captain Marvel. It's nested stories.
Now, listen, on Always Foolish, what we don't do is talk about ice cream shops and Oppenheimer. Well, not always. We take an unpopular episode of Doctor Who, we summarise it, and then we highlight the stuff we like, try to address our criticisms or some of the more commonplace criticisms, really trying to raise it up and be positive about a fandom and a show that we love. And we'll also be bringing you some random tidbits that we discovered along the way. Does that sound good, Tom?
Yes, it does. But to be fair, I'm very much a captive audience here. I've agreed to do this podcast with you. So if I said at this point, no, actually, I'm not sure about this, then we'd have a real problem on our hands.
I actually believe what happened was I had already had this idea and I was going to suggest it to you. And then literally 5 minutes before I suggested it to you, you suggested the same idea to me.
Yeah.
So, listen, we're both captives of each other in some kind of weird
That's
Doctor
the weirdest
Master
way you could possibly have
scenario,
said that. I don't know whether I want this to be a Doctor Master scenario.
Anyway, this episode, we're doing The Unquiet Dead, Series 1, Episode 3, because we wanted a bit of a challenge. So we're doing something that's a bit more middling. Like, people don't hate this episode, do they, Tom?
No, I don't think so. I don't think... There are not many people out there, I don't think, that would rate this episode even at the bottom of Series 1.
Let's start with Old, reliable Mark Gatiss.
So in this episode, Mark Gatiss is writing a story about a writer who just keeps doing the same thing over and over again and is getting a bit tired of it.
Charles Dickens is Mark Gatiss' self-insert character in this episode.
That is an amazing criticism with which to bring this up, yeah.
I don't think that's what I saw on IMDb.
I was reading a really interesting piece of writing by the novelist Zadie Smith recently. Like, she's just written a new historical novel. It wasn't originally supposed to have Charles Dickens in it. And then as she did her research, she was like, oh no, Charles Dickens just got involved with literally everything that happened in the mid-19th century.
Simon Callow, one of the things... So Simon Callow, who played Charles Dickens in this episode, wasn't sure about taking the role because he didn't want... He felt Dickens was used as a kind of catch-all Victorian person. But it does sort of sound like Charles Dickens was a catch-all Victorian person. Now, the question is, did Charles Dickens actually fight zombies in Cardiff near Christmas?
Yes. Yeah, the historical record is fairly reliable on that
This episode is based on true historical events. Do you want to summarise the episode briefly, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've got an opening hook that is a zombie attack, which specifically it's in a funeral home. There's a guy called Sneed and there's a girl called Gwyneth, undertakers, and somebody brings a dead person along to them, and oh my goodness, that dead person gets reanimated.
Gwyneth and Sneed. It's like a crime duo.
The old woman who's been reanimated by something that looks like gas just sort of toddles off into the night.
And she
Doctor
screams,
and Rose arrive.
And it cuts to the credits.
Yeah, the old woman goes to a big event that turns out to be Charles Dickens doing a reading of A Christmas Carol. Dickens is obviously quite tired. He's worn out. He's fed up of this whole kind of like speaking tours sort of thing.
He's going to die in a year. He doesn't know that.
Yeah, well, we don't know that until the end of the episode, unless people are really good at knowing details about Charles Dickens' life. Yeah. At the Christmas Carol reading, gas creature within the old zombie woman bursts out and swirls around the room. Everybody reacts in quite an understandable way and leaves. The Doctor and Rose show up for one reason or another, gets chloroformed by Sneed and Gwyneth and taken back to their undertaker's place. Yet they also grab the old woman. The Doctor meets Dickens. They have some charming back and forth and chase Sneed and Gwyneth to the house. The Gelth start actually talking, the Gelth being the gas creatures within the old woman. Which is a good moment for the story to sort of change gear and become something a little bit more complicated than just zombies in Cardiff.
Typical Saturday night.
There's a few scenes with the Doctor talking to Dickens about rationality. Gwyneth is psychic. Gwyneth does not seem to know whether or not she wants to hide the fact that she's psychic or not, which is quite funny.
My grandmother had the gift. Do never speak of the gift. But yeah, the gift.
She tries to hide it from Rose at first and then just goes on a 2-minute long monologue about the future.
By the way, you'll be killed by a wolf or something in the future, but I don't know anything about the future.
Anyway, then they have a seance. They have a seance then, which, rad. Love seances.
Yep, the Gelth show up at the seance.
The Doctor delivers the single funniest line of the entire episode, which is the happy medium joke, which is hilarious.
I prefer Sneed's aside about maybe they can get a cheap exorcism because they did the funeral for one of the bishop's cousins or something.
I did like that as well. Yeah, so then the Gelth tell everybody that they've lost their corporeal forms because of the Time War. The Doctor looks a little bit shifty about this.
Yeah, good.
And what they actually want is just to come and inhabit human corpses and walk around in them because they're not using them. The Doctor's like, actually, fair enough. Rose is like, that's disgusting. You sure about that? And the Doctor's like, actually, yeah, that's fine. So then Gwyneth opens the rift, which she is apparently a part of, to let the Gelth through. And then, as she does this, the Gelth then turn out to actually be evil. And the way that this is shown is by them turning into red demons. Red. Yeah.
Some of them turn red. Only one of them turns red.
One of them turns red and starts talking in an evil voice and has sharp teeth.
Also still gas.
The Gelth possess things. Sneed dies and gets possessed by the Gelth.
Lots of zombies in the basement.
Dickens just sort of sidles out of the room and runs around the streets of Cardiff for a bit. The Doctor and Rose get stuck in a cell? I'm really not sure why there is a sort of a prison cell in this Undertaker's.
Well, it's because he's been expecting this. He's a prepper.
Yeah, maybe.
His old Sneed.
Yeah. Sneed is a prepper, yeah. Then Dickens...
I've got the bear traps hidden, Gwyneth.
I've got all of the water purification tablets for when society inevitably collapses. Oh, but Mr. Sneed, I don't know why you can be saying that society will collapse. Here we are in 1869. Society is at its finest. Dickens has a realisation about the gas. Actually, there are numerous points throughout this episode where somebody is like, of course, the gas.
Like when I fart.
But Dickens fills the room with gas, which draws the Gelf out into the room. Gwyneth says, don't worry, I'm going to blow these up. Rose and
That's
Dickens
exactly what she says.
run for it. Rose says, don't let Gwyneth sacrifice herself, and the doctor says, I won't. But conveniently enough, Gwyneth turns out to have been dead for the past 5 minutes or so, despite still talking and doing things. And then she gets some matches, blows up the funeral home, and the Gelf are blown up. Then the final scene is with Dickens. He's really reinvigorated. He's regained his sort of lust for life.
Perfect timing.
He's a changed man. He's quite excited. He announces that the solution to the mystery of Edwin Drood, his great unfinished novel, is that it was actually blue elementals that did the killing. However, then the Doctor reveals to Rose that, he's going to die next year anyway, so he's not going to accidentally invent an absolutely bizarre brand of sci-fi.
Charles Dickens has been listening behind the corner, and that then becomes like a villain arc.
Yeah.
Charles Dickens to stop himself dying.
Charles Dickens joins the faction.
Oh no, that's not. The faction paradox will come up later. They land back in London, and they're like, wait, everything's devastated. Shink, shink, shink. I have been waiting for you, Doctor. And it's Charles Dickens in like a exosuit holding like Jackie aloft.
Call me the ghost of Christmas that will never come.
Call me the ghost of Christmas forever.
Oh, dear Doctor. Did you have great expectations about the future?
No, I think I've pipped you at the post. This is really a Miss Havisham. No, wait, no.
We really are living in hard times these days.
I bet you didn't expect this, Oliver Twist. Behold, my Fay-gun. No?
Yeah, no, Fay-gun does work. No. It does work.
Fay-gun. Charles Dickens is the greatest author of his time. I hope his Gelf ghost is happy with how we're talking about him. I wonder what Charles Dickens' ghost would have thought of the Unquiet Dead. I bet he would have thought it was fine. I bet he'd have been like, what's the television? Well, that is a good overall summary. So I think it's time to get into our top positives for the episode. What are our favourite bits? Our favourite bits. First one, we were talking about jokes that we liked before.
Mm-hmm.
Sneed says where all the activity in the house is, and he's like, "Oh, it's in the morgue." And Rose goes, "Oh, it wouldn't have been in the gazebo, would it?" And that really got me. I love the gazebo line. That stuck in my head. But then, in terms of like a bigger positive in the episode, I think the Gelf are really good. Like, I think they're brilliant. A classic idea.
Very well realised.
Yeah, they look
given,
cool.
The budget isn't massive for this, I don't think. But they don't need to be complicated. They're swirling.
They're not wholly CGI. They are. Like, when it's a human face, like it is a person that like they recorded and then like added some effects to. It's actually Zoe Thorne who voices the Gelf, but also voiced the Toclophane.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Their biological type is roughly humanoid gas. I don't believe there are any other roughly humanoid gases on TARDIS Wiki. I think that the great thing about them is they're making something that's commonplace, or was commonplace at the time at least, gas scary, and that is the typical Doctor Who thing to do, but also crucially, and I think this elevates them, they're tied in with the Time War, which brings pathos and consequence to the series and to a villain that otherwise would have just been, and some of the criticisms still were one note monster of the week. Also, I mean, the fact that they use human bodies is like, again, it's a cool twist, and there was a plan to kind of just, and this would have been weird, the Doctor and Rose just leave the funeral home, go to the TARDIS, go forward in time to look at what happens if they don't stop the Gelf. And it's like a world of shambling corpses. It's very like Pyramid of Mars.
I can see why that was mooted. I can also see why they chose not to do it.
It was budget, apparently, but also like it wouldn't have worked.
So for the modern series, this is, of course, the first historical episode in it. So it does make sense that there are a few points where you can see this, that Rose kind of questions the mechanics of time travel at a couple of points. She's like, well, I know that the Gelf didn't win. The Doctor's like, well, never mind. Also, at one point, Rose This is slightly more baffling in the universe. Rose says, hang on a moment, I can't die in the past. And the Doctor's like, what are you talking about? Of course you can.
I think it's fine for someone who's never questioned the mechanics of time travel. I think the fact that I didn't pick up, now you say it, I'm like, of course they were sort of spelling out how time travel's going to work, but it didn't occur to me. And that's good. That's, again, good in the writing, that it feels natural enough that I wasn't like, hey, they're giving me the rules. Is that one of your positives as well, then?
Yes, it is, yeah. So so one of my big positives would be that basically Mark Gatiss gets quite a lot of stick for, as we mentioned at the start of the episode, kind of doing similar things over and over again. He's got his own quite sort of idiosyncratic stamp on how to write a Doctor Who episode. But also I think that does make him the perfect person to basically write right at the start of the modern era.
He's a pretty safe pair of
a story
hands.
That kind of says, this is the sort of stuff that we're going to do. I think Gatiss is the perfect person for this episode. There's slightly obvious title drop to his Big Finish audio, Phantasmagoria.
I don't remember that at all.
I've
heard Phantasmagoria. It's been a very long time.
In the Christmas Carol reading scene, when the gas comes out, somebody says, what is this Phantasmagoria? And then everybody turns to the screen and winks and says, by Big Finish Audios.
Nicholas Briggs turns to the screen and says, I'm not exec producer here yet, but I will be. And honestly, it's going to be absolutely fantastic for my financial portfolio. Now, Phantasmagoria, I remember liking it. It's been a very long time since I've heard it. It is the second ever Doctor Who Big Finish.
My overall point, basically, is that I think that Mark Gatiss is a very good pick to write this episode. It's actually the first non-Russell written episode of the new series, as well, is worth noting, because Russell did Rose and End of the World. This is the first episode that shows there can be a bit of variety in tone, because Rose and End of the World, in many ways quite different episodes, but also clearly coming from the same authorial voice. One of the things it's introducing the audience to is not just, here's how a historical story can work in modern Doctor Who.
Here's how the format of the show can work.
Here's how Doctor Who can be such a varied show.
Before he'd written this, he'd written, beyond the Phantasmagoria Big Finish audio, he'd done a few of the books, and Nightshade's pretty well regarded. I've not read it, but I've heard the audio. And Last of the Gadarene, he'd also written.
Yes, that's him as well,
Do you like Last of the Gadarene?
There's a few others that he did as well. I think St. Anthony's Fire.
It's another one of my positives, and it also come to how I think the episode could be elevated later.
Oh, right, yeah.
But Rose's speech at the start, when they're in the TARDIS, so before they've left it, was it you can go back to see days gone by, 1,000 million sunsets ago. Nobody else can do that. Christmas only happens once, like a Christmas day only happens one time. That little line, that little summary, which I've just butchered, is Doctor Who. Like, that is Doctor Who. Or what Doctor Who would become in the modern era, to a degree, a meditation on, like, the temporariness of things.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Gatiss clearly gets the show. He gets it on a very fundamental level.
Yeah, which makes sense. Another thing, which I imagine might be a thing you have down as well, Billy and Eve Miles have really, really, really good chemistry.
Yeah, so one thing I've got in my notes is that you can see why Eve Miles was given a spin-off.
100%,
based on this. And to a degree, I think that this episode is it's Exhibit A in why Torchwood should be considered Eve Miles' spin-off rather than John Barrowman's spin-off.
I love Eve Miles. I think she's fantastic. I do have a little story, which is when she went to the audition for this, she accidentally wore a shirt of two naked women kissing with the slogan, I support nudist colonies on it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure Russell would have absolutely, can't have this on our family show.
This is sacrilege, and you know who we need to play someone sacrilegious in an episode about ghosts. No, yeah, I think he loved it. That is Eve Miles all over. There's a brilliant story where Big Finish were waiting for her to show up for a recording and she was late, and they called her and were like, "Hi Eve, where are you?" And she'd forgotten. She was in the car driving her kids on holiday, and she just went, "Oh shit," and turned the car around and drove the kids back. She's amazing. She's great, and she's not now part of the current Torchwood team anymore, just because the Torchwood team is kind of it's all new and the audios, but. She had a single episode in the most recent Torchwood series, which was fantastic. But Eve Miles can just endlessly come back. She's fantastic. Yeah. And I think basically what they're doing is they're intercutting scenes, pretty much two-hander scenes between Dickens and the Doctor, and Eve Miles and Gwyneth. All the performances are really strong in the episodes. It's another positive for me. All the guest cast, including Alan David as Sneed.
Yeah, Sneed gets less to do. It's a slightly peculiar quirk of the script that there is a sort of... Sneed doesn't really get an awful lot to do in around the sort of 15 minutes until he dies. Like, he says a couple of things in the seance, but not very much. But pretty much
he's there to
as soon as he's kidnapped.
Texture,
yeah.
I think. But he does it really well. Alan David is funny and more sympathetic than I remember. Because in my head, Sneed's like an all-out villain. But he's not. He's very sympathetic. He's in over his head.
Yeah,
he's a guy of his time.
He's trying to deal with these problems. I really, really love the completely sort of matter-of-fact way he responds to the gas zombie attack at the start. He's like, oh, not again.
I left the kettle on and then the ghost alien things got out of the old lady again. Like when the old woman at the start strangles her like nephew and kills him, and he's not. There's no point at which Steve's like, oh no, it's so sad a human life stopped out. He's like, oh, okay, I guess we'll be doing this job for free then. It's an undertaker, an undertaker's not a charity.
Yeah.
Because like, actually, you were meant to be donating to the charitable foundation. So, shut up, Gwyneth. But Eccleston as well.
Eccleston, of course, brilliant.
Energy, extremely, extremely good. You can tell he's very excited to be here, I think. And I know he's obviously having trouble behind the scenes and he's not necessarily enjoying himself. But there are moments here where I think I can see Christopher Eccleston genuinely enjoying himself when when doing the Charles Dickens stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Eccleston loves like history and he loves like celebrity historicals. It's one of the things he's requested a lot with Big Finish. He wants to do stuff with usually like suffragettes or founders of movement. It's something he really enjoys, especially given like Dickens's pedigree for talking about the plight of the kind of working classes and the working poor in Victorian England. It's something Eccleston feels very passionate about, and I think you can tell.
Yeah, completely agree. The Doctor's role in this story is very similar to how it is throughout Series 1, which is something that sets Series 1 really apart from all of the other seasons of the modern series, I think, is that the Doctor's role is to sort of stand on the sidelines and encourage people to do things, rather than to really solve the problems himself. And I really like that. I think that that's a brilliant angle to play on the character, and I kind of...
It makes sense
wish that we had a little bit more of that.
Well.
Yeah, exactly.
From the Time War, it's a good idea to ease him back in. I wonder how much of it is deliberate and how much of it is that's just the kind of style of stories they were telling.
I think this is all very deliberate, and I think that it's all leading up to Parting of the Ways, where just his absence has made Rose, Mickey, and Jackie better to the degree that they do something basically physically impossible to rescue him and save everyone in the future.
They hire a tow truck at short
almost
notice
physically
in London,
impossible,
which is incredible.
It's crazy. Yeah,
it's really hard to do, especially the yellow one, because the yellow ones are the coolest ones.
Yeah.
Paint the TARDIS yellow, Russell. I was trying to remember who the new showrunner was. Now I was like, wait, there's Russell again. Paint the TARDIS yellow, Russell, you coward.
Do the happiness patrol, but it's yellow this time.
Imagine all the speeches about a big blue box coming to save you, but
something old,
blue
something new,
yellow.
Something borrowed, something yellow.
Something yellow. It's very different, isn't it?
Something harsh, something mellow.
Something sick, something yellow. The whole world was burning and collapsing, and everything that I ever knew was gone. And then, out of nothing, a sort of weird yellow box appeared, like a really horrible off shade. And I thought, I'm not getting in that anyway. So I died, and that's why I'm here. He's talking to Missy in the Neversphere. Yeah, I don't have any more positives.
I was going to just say the mood, basically. The episode absolutely nails the mood of...
No, the ood is later.
The mood, the Victorian Gothic sort of feel of it, that is getting a lot of things.
It's pioneered by Jago and Lightfoot.
Yeah, it was pioneered by, the Victorian era.
Yeah, who were created by Jago and Lightfoot.
Okay, yeah. It's set in a funeral home, there's a seance, there's sort of like shambling corpses.
I love spiritualism
set
as well.
on a dark winter's night. The mood stays really consistent throughout it, and even though there are jokes, which is good, we get the gazebo joke, we get the happy medium joke, which is brilliant.
You love that happy medium joke.
I love the happy medium
joke. It's not
joke.
a happy medium.
It's hilarious. But yeah, all of these things, they don't sort of detract or undercut from this mood. That's all of my main sort of things I liked. There's a lot of small things I like as well. Okay, one more small thing. I really like the Brecon line where the Doctor's like, they're from up there, and he's like, what, from Brecon?
I
Anyway,
like
yes.
E.T.'s scary in bits. I wouldn't say it's a scary episode. I think the morgue stuff, it is scary. One of the complaints that you get is that it was too scary for kids. I don't think I agree with that. It was so scary that a friend of mine didn't watch this episode until like this year.
All right.
We are prime for a return of the Gelf with Burke and Hare. I want an episode called Burke and Hare and Gelf. I want it. Make it happen. Russell.
Yeah, that would work well.
I think that brings us on to our main critiques and then general criticisms with the episode. The Critics' Corner. So, my main critiques, and I don't know if these really tie in with any of the ones that... I mean, one of the critiques that I don't actually agree with is that the Gelf are quite stereotypical Doctor Who villains. I suppose I don't really agree with that because I think their backstory lends them a bit of difference, and also it is episode 3 of the revival.
Yeah. I think
it makes sense.
Fair enough, yeah. You don't necessarily want something amazingly complicated at that point.
You've just had, like, Cassandra, who's a very odd villain in the previous episode as well.
Yeah.
But I think, that thing I said about Rose's speech, I think capitalise on that more. If you tie it into the idea of people only have one life, then you get the desecration of that life by the Gelf.
Yeah.
And they do stuff a bit with Dickens and him being rational and his commitment to social causes, and that does tie into the singular life stuff. But I think they can really nail down into the Gelf extending life past where it should be. And I think that's... What you don't really get is an explanation for why Gelf-possessed bodies kind of repeat things they were going to do.
Yeah,
that never comes up.
That's a good point, yeah, and it suggests that there is something remaining of those people in there.
And I don't want an explanation for that. I don't want the Gelf to be like, oh, it's this. What's cool would be if the Doctor asks them, why'd you do that? And the Gelf say, we don't know.
Yeah.
And then that just
does
gives...
sort of then raise a little bit more of an actual problem with possessing corpses, because otherwise it's like, all right, yeah, fair enough, this is actually...
And also,
not so bad.
Explains Gwyneth's sacrifice more because she's stronger.
Exactly, yeah.
She's not just a Gelf-possessed body.
Mm-hmm.
It explains, like, that the Gelf don't understand why Gwyneth would do what she does.
Yeah.
They're possessing her, but again, there's this fragmented, sort of mysterious, non-understanding thing, which you can interpret however you want. You can interpret as there's a bit of the brain left behind. You can interpret as when you possess someone, do you become them? Is it actually the Gelf take you on qualities of humans?
Exactly, yeah. I think that's really good, yeah, and that sort of ties into two things I was going to bring up, actually. One of them was that there's a bit of a through line in this episode to do with faith and religion, but it feels like it doesn't quite end up connecting to anything.
Yes.
So Dickens, it's suggested at one point that what he's having at the start is this sort of kind of crisis of faith, and almost a crisis of faith in rationality. I don't know, it feels like it pales in comparison to the broader problems that he's having, which is that he's just kind of ill and tired and is like, thinking...
He does learn that aliens are real.
Yeah.
Quite quickly.
Yeah, he does, yeah, and he adjusts quite well to that, broadly speaking. But yeah, there's quite a few things, particularly in the first half of the episode, to do with religion and faith and things like this, that then doesn't really... Like, once the Gelf turn evil sort of gets forgotten a little bit. So tying it to this idea of life after death, effectively, would be be a good way to capitalise on that. And then the other thing that I was going to mention, which, as you mentioned yourself, is, Gwyneth's sacrifice doesn't make sense, and not in a sort of, oh, well, we've got to resolve the plot somehow, but it's irritatingly convenient for ethical reasons that the Doctor's like, I can't let you sacrifice yourself. Oh, wait, no, turns out you're already dead, that's fine. And then leaves. And it slightly bugs me a little bit that Rose quite reasonably says, well, what the heck's going on with that then? And Dickens says, maybe we'll never know. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio.
Oh, well, I got there, and Gwyneth had a gun, actually, and she was actually just blasting the Gelf away, and I thought, I don't need to leave there. And she said, she turned to me and put on sunglasses. I was like, okay, Doctor, you can stop taking a piss now. She said, okay, cool, but don't ask stupid questions.
Yeah, so anyway.
Cut to black. Hire me, Russell.
But yeah, so Gwyneth's sacrifice doesn't make too much sense. And to be fair, I'm also not 100% convinced by her backstory and the idea that she's part of the Rift.
Yeah, like, the thing with it is, if she's part of the Rift,
then
isn't
surely
there
so
going to
is
be
everyone else in
loads
Cardiff.
of people who are part of the Rift? I think, again, it's not like a thing, you don't need to explain everything in super detail, Doctor Who, and they didn't. I think it's just make it somehow add like a line that makes it more specific to her. It's a problem that I think we're having a lot of Doctor Who things is to avoid any of these, like, and they are nitpicky plot holes, but to avoid them, just add like a line that just narrows things down.
I think also part of the problem with this one is that it's kind of being undermined by what the Rift subsequently becomes. I think basically the Rift in Cardiff, as it is written in this episode, is just a small thing. It is confined to one house.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times throughout the episode that Sneed or Gwyneth says something like, "Oh, the problem's this house. There's something wrong with this house. This house is haunted."
The Doctor says it's a weak point on the Rift, I think, particularly.
Yeah.
I don't think that area of land's been brought back in any Torchwood, maybe in the books, which I'm not familiar with. But yeah, I think that the issue is Gwyneth's powers are kind of ill-defined. They're from the Rift, but also they're in her family.
Yeah,
and also,
she can see the future, but can also open the Rift.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned at the
start,
she doesn't
all the
really
angels and Gelf through her mouth.
She doesn't really seem to have decided whether or not she wants people to know that she can see the future, because she's very, very cagey about it. And it's like, "Oh, I'm sure I don't know about that." And it's like, "Also, about the future, it is absolutely crazy how people could fly around in metal machines." It's like, well, yes, fair enough. To be fair, it is absolutely crazy, and I think that, broadly speaking, every single time I see an aeroplane, that there's something wrong with this.
You're going to have a good time on Thursday then, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going to have a great time. Every single moment of the flight, I'm going to be like, what is happening? What is happening?
I understand it as physics happens.
Yeah.
And therefore...
Yeah, you're a scientist.
Okay. I think, to be honest, I am. And I understand that, like, if bees can fly, then planes can do it too. Because I'm a biologist. I think the thing is, if anything, just less explanation of Gwyneth's powers. She's psychic can be enough. That happens in a lot of old Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah.
She's just a bit psychic. Obviously, the Rift becomes very integral to Doctor Who lore later, so kind of has to be introduced.
Yeah, I don't know. But Gatiss wasn't to know that at the time. And like, it becomes important again in Boomtown, but also I think it's worth mentioning that at the time this was written, Boomtown wasn't planned. Yeah, it was...
Volcano Day?
Yeah, it was supposed to replace Paul Abbott doing something absolutely unhinged by the sounds of it.
Basically, you could, instead of having the Rift stuff, you just hammer much harder into the spiritualism stuff. And it was initially going to be set in like a spiritualism hotel and have way more characters in it. That sort of makes sense why without those characters it might be harder. But I really like spiritualism. It's something that really interests me, like the era of history and seances and the various practices and the mediums. And you can just tap into that more without needing...
I mean, it could well be a case of the Gelf basically access the world through Gwyneth and through her psychic abilities, rather than needing to posit the Rift.
Yeah, and I think those little tweaks would, I would say, like, bring the episode into focus. If you imagine the episode's a little bit blurry, and it just focuses it a little bit more. In ways, a good episode, and it still works. Yeah. It's just a little bit hand wavy, but not in the Doctor Who way that's like, I like that, but in like the kind of, I think they kind of maybe wrote themselves into a bit of a corner kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of other bits in this as well where it does feel like, oh well, that this makes something in the region of sense, but not necessarily sense per se.
I've got one like that as well.
Dickens' grand plan about filling the room with gas, which draws them all out,
kills the Doctor and Rose, cuts them back.
Yeah. History will record that Charles Dickens died a mysterious death in a gas-filled cellar in Cardiff for no good reason.
History will record that Charles Dickens died in prison, having murdered two people, two English people in a basement in Cardiff with gas, is what history will record. And possibly two others, because there are two other bodies in there.
Well, there's three, I think. There's Sneed, Mrs. Redruth, and the young guy as well.
Gwyneth.
And also Gwyneth is there as well, to be fair, yeah. That's a very
small
thing.
I want the sequel of a police officer investigating the death of the nephew. Who, by the way, in the scene
Welsh
where
police officer, all right.
Yeah, a Welsh police officer from maybe the future called maybe Andy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I reckon probably just a couple things left. I think you name it as it was originally titled. My name's Dickens. ... Charles Dickens. I think keep that title. Better title than Unquiet Dead.
It is funny that you should say that, actually, because that is something else I did want to mention. That
right.
This is the modern series' first celebrity historical. You know, this episode is, in some ways, it's built around, it's Charles Dickens confronting ghosts at Christmas time, as Donna will later say. And it's followed up with, then, in Series 3, we've got celebrity historical about a famous writer. We've got Shakespeare. In Series 4, we've got a celebrity historical about a famous writer, Agatha Christie. Series 5, we've got a celebrity historical about a famous artist of a different kind, in Vincent van Gogh. But
so Series 6 got a celebrity historical about a small boy that owns dolls.
There's an interesting way in which this differs from the other ones.
Right.
The Unquiet Dead doesn't really revolve around Dickens being a writer.
Or being
Shakespeare
there,
Code.
Really.
Shakespeare Code is about Shakespeare's powers as a writer. Unicorn and the Wasp is about
Agatha Christie's structure of her stories.
Yeah, and Vincent and the Doctor is about how Vincent van Gogh perceives the world. Yeah, Dickens's presence is kind of almost more sort of thematic than, or it doesn't drive the plot. I mean, that's all right. That's not a criticism. Not everything in a story has to be there for plot. You know, it's a criticism, quote unquote criticism. It often annoys me is, this doesn't add anything to the plot or something, because stories are far more than just
it's a very Twitter criticism. It's people...
Yeah, Twittercism.
Oh, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, these Twittercisms of... I am annoyed because I didn't like this episode for either legitimately I sat down, watched it, didn't enjoy it, or I have vested interest in not liking this thing. And so I'm going to find things I don't like. Like, I'm going to look...
Yeah.
For stuff, not stuff that actually doesn't work for me, but just stuff that I know I can criticize because I can make a point about it.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, it doesn't add anything to the plot. The same with, they've run out of ideas, where a lot of the time, it's more, this is an idea you don't like, because the fact that they're making something that isn't identical to something before it,
that would be running out of ideas.
They haven't run out of ideas. And even, like, just stuff that jumps the shark, that's not running out of ideas. You've still got more ideas. The idea is just getting progressively dumber and dumber. And I think, actually, to be honest, now, if they didn't do enough with Charles Dickens, that's a different criticism. But actually, I think they do a fair amount of him, and a lot of character work, and a lot of stuff with him and the Doctor that I think is really nice, but not soppy.
Yeah, I quite like that it's engaging more with Dickens as a person rather than Dickens as the legend of Dickens.
Yeah.
Like Shakespeare Code, which we will definitely get to at some point, is about Shakespeare as the mythologized figure of Shakespeare for almost all of this runtime. There's a couple of points where you see the human within, but for the most part it is about Shakespeare with a capital S.
And for that, I would recommend...
don't say what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
No, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say I recommend...
the Big Finish episode, The Kingmaker.
I'm actually not going to say Big Fish episode, The Kingmaker. I'm going to say the Big Fish episode, whose name I don't remember, from the 5th series of the audios they did with David Bradley as the First Doctor, which is mainly about Judith Shakespeare. But has Shakespeare in it as like a dude who's struggling to afford to like pay his actors and like put his plays on, and it's a pure historical, and it's much more about the actual like day-to-day difficulty Shakespeare had as a dude rather than magic word witches. And I like the Carrie Knights, but it's that will offer you more. The Kingmaker will not offer you a more realistic take on Shakespeare.
I thought you just wanted to talk about The Kingmaker.
I don't really remember it very well. I need to re-listen to it, and then we could probably do an entire episode on it.
Okay, we're not doing episodes on Big
Richard
Finish
III
just yet.
is William Shakespeare, is that right?
Yeah, and vice versa, I think.
Anyway. Okay.
Let's move on to the big thing.
The big thing, which is on the Wikipedia page for this episode, it's on the TARDIS wiki, it's quite famous, is author Lawrence Miles, who's best known for doing a lot of the Eighth Doctor adventures, the weird faction paradoxy stuff.
Alien Bodies, Interference Part 2, Adventurers of Henrietta Street, Dead Romance.
So basically, he was a
Doctor
Who
Lawrence Miles
writer
wrote a bunch of novels.
Some note, but he's quite an
opinionated.
Intense dude, acquired taste.
I really like his writing.
I think I'd like his writing.
As a person, I think he's
intense.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the dude to really say anything. I don't want to be rude about him. But
no, absolutely not.
I think basically his comments were effectively that this episode is massively xenophobic because what it is the Gelf are immigrants and the Doctor is
refugees,
like no immigration.
Refugees from a war.
Yeah. Immigration is bad. They must be destroyed. And then, and to be fair, it is a bit one of those Doctor Who genocides where he laughs a bit, the Doctor.
Yeah.
But
it's a little bit more. There's a bit more to Miles' criticisms than that, really, which is that the argument between Rose and the Doctor over whether the Gelth should be allowed to come to Earth is one where the Doctor sort of seems to win the argument, but then the Gelth end up proving Rose right that they are dangerous and they are coming to Earth with, bad intentions and are trying to just take it over.
Which is a tale as old as time in Doctor Who, to be fair.
It is, but, that
right from
doesn't exempt it from criticism.
No. Claws of Axos is a perfect episode, though, so...
Yeah.
I like the Claws of Axos, I do.
In some ways, it is a fair criticism. The way that Lawrence Miles is I think, deliberately inflammatory. And there's another essay by Elizabeth Sandifer sort of responding to this, where she makes the quite good point that even if you can read the episode in this way, clearly that's not the way that the episode is supposed to be read, because nothing else about it suggests that it is a UKIP screed.
Yeah.
It would be very, very difficult to watch The Unquiet Dead and come away from it thinking, oh, I guess this episode is uncritically endorsing UKIP.
As an 8-year-old child, I started this episode having hope for the future, and I come away dressed in full purple with a Nigel Farage face
I just want my blue
mask.
passport.
All I wanted, my blue plate should be purple and yellow, the colours of the best political party, UKIP. No one take this out of context. Obviously, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Xenophobia is bad.
Yeah.
Always foolish. Officially stands.
Does not stand with xenophobia.
Always foolish. Always Foolish's official stance, if you can believe it, is that xenophobia is bad. You can quote us on that.
You can put that on your website headers.
You can put us,
anyway.
Yeah, please. And I think you can make the Gelf a bit more sympathetic and maybe destroyed a bit more reluctantly, and have the Doctor not kind of laugh off potentially wiping out an entire species, which is a Doctor Who thing pointed out in a very, very good Alistair Beckett King sketch. But ultimately, and this is the case with, I think, a lot of these kind of, not all criticisms of this stuff, but in Doctor Who I would say a lot of them, is reading too much into what is like a writing choice that maybe doesn't...
there are narrative shortcuts here taken, which is, the Gelth do need to end up being evil, because the third episode of a new series is not the time to be to introduce the idea that actually now all human corpses are piloted around by gas creatures.
That's fine. It would have been amazing if they revealed there were celebrities, if it turns out the Gelf were good, and then it just cuts to celebrities in our time who were actually Gelf possessed Victorian corpses.
Yeah.
Bruce Forsyth's been alive for 300 years. Princess Diana. That's why she has Di in her name.
When she died, a Gelf took over. Anyway.
And now she became Camilla?
It's clear that, the Gelth need to end up being evil. So arguably being aware of this possible subtext from the get-go, something that the production team could have done. There is something else that...
which Miles argued, and I think there's something in that. You should try and see if your script
need to be aware of your
from
subtext.
Another angle.
Yeah, fair enough. This subtext is there. It is bad. It means that the episode can be read in an unpleasant way, and it does also weaken bits of the episode as well. I think that the reveal that the Gelth are evil, it's not very good as it stands, partially because it is done in the most cliched way of angel figures turned into red demon figures with sharp teeth and talking evil voices, but also because when I rewatched it, it did feel like a moment at which the story became discernibly a little bit less interesting.
Yeah, and actually,
basically,
here's a way...
The story set up an interesting moral debate and then sort of just backed out of it by saying, but actually this is irrelevant because they're evil anyway.
Again, I think it's one of those things where Doctor Who is annoyingly, sometimes like that flat line has a bit of that as well, where it just becomes destroy them. One thing they can do that would immediately, I mean, I don't know if it would make it better or worse, but the Gelf, I think this specifically says 5 million of them. So the Gelf could be like, we are taking 5 million, we're not going to kill anyone else, we want our bodies, and you're a Time Lord, and you have no right to tell us what to do in this regard. We're gonna do what we have to survive. If you make it more like that, I mean, then again, you're setting up pretty early in the series. Like, that's a really great, like, episode 9, where the Doctor has to do something like that, and he does have to stop them, but it is like, I feel really bad for stopping them. That could have been a really good...
Goes to one thing I was going to suggest. Shift the focus slightly so that the reason the Doctor's supporting the Gelf coming to Earth isn't because, morally and ethically speaking, that is the correct argument. But if we were to shift it to be a little bit more about the Doctor's survivor's guilt and the fact that the Doctor is, as soon as he hears the words Time War, he's like, oh, right, this is my fault. I need to do something about this. Now I'm going to say that out loud. Maybe that's slightly the wrong choice for episode 3 as well, because you do still need to have
the thing, right?
That mystery around the Time War.
Exactly. The thing is, it's got episode 3 syndrome in that it has to be fairly like, this is how a historical Doctor Who episode is going to work. And early in the series syndrome anyway, not just early in the revival, these kind of stories where, generally speaking, where stuff can kind of be flipped on its head, serve better kind of midway through the season to add some dramatic tension to secondary things. Like, I think an episode in which Christopher Eccleston has to reluctantly stop the Gelf because they're going to cause too much damage to history and too much damage to people. He recognises that ultimately this situation is sort of massively of his own making. That's a really great one where you can come away with it.
To do, but you're right, it's hard to do that.
It's too early, and you can come away with it, and you can come away from that as well. This is the thing again with Doctor Who. People like to watch these shows and be like, "Well, the show is saying that the Doctor is right, and therefore I disagree." But no. Doctor Who often leaves it up to interpretation as to whether or not the actions of the characters are right, and that would be a really good one to be like. Was the Doctor right to do that? You know, Rose can be left uncertain and not sure. It's interesting. I didn't expect the discussion to go this deep on this, but it is interesting. And I think it's something we'll see again and again.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to do the Unquiet Dead, and I think it kind of depends on the question of, do you want this to be episode 3, first ever modern series, historical, introduce people to the ground rules, or do you want it to be something with quite a lot of philosophical heft to it, where it's arguing about what rights do corpses have? The point that Rose doesn't make in the ethical debate is, you know, the corpses did not give consent for their bodies to be used as flesh puppets for gas aliens.
But Gwyneth does.
Yeah, Gwyneth does, which is interesting.
Which could have been used interestingly in this thing. I think you probably need a 2-parter. Maybe I don't know how it will be a 2-parter, but to do this amount of stuff is...
All of this is going to end up with something with the sort of the moral complexity of Zygon invasion inversion. Yeah. I bet we're going to be referencing a lot, because it is, in some ways, I think, is the gold standard of how to do an episode that goes from big sci-fi hook to just sort of people talking about big ideas.
It'll be an interesting
also,
one.
To be fair, I think it's a very Peter Harness thing in general, really, because...
Anyway, so that became quite a complex discussion on the Unquiet Dead.
I think so.
Those kind of moral debatey tweaks would elevate it, but it's already a solid enough story.
Yeah, exactly.
7.5 out of 10 IMDb. And actually, do you know what? I reckon it's a strength for the episode that we're basically suggesting the addition of a handful of lines and a kind of twist to the morality within it, but the overall structure stays the same, and it becomes a much more philosophical muse, which is a strength to the episode that it doesn't require an entire overhaul, ripping out to become something that could be seen as a meditation on something.
Yeah, I think, the actual sort of the story of the episode, by which I mean the stuff that I would say 95% of the audience watch Doctor Who for, we're just part of the weird 5% who will be like, well, what's the message of this? We're not normal in the slightest here.
How can I put Sergeant Andy in this?
Okay, yeah, that's an entirely different question.
It's just a question I ask. No one else
Yeah.
asked that question.
But yeah, it is very much to the credit of Unquiet Dead, I should say, that the changes we want to make are just add some more stuff in to sort some smaller things out.
Yeah.
It's the sort of episode that I don't think is going to appear at the top of very many people's lists, because it is, in some ways, it's a bread and butter episode. But the thing about bread and butter is that, it's a staple for a reason.
It's nice. Dip it in some soup. Dip it in some tomato soup. The tomato soup is like, I don't know, Rose. Rose is like tomato soup. It's pretty good, but, it's not as good as the main, which is like Pint and Ways.
Yeah, you're kind of grinding black pepper over it, which is end of the world, maybe. It's spice, but then you get to the
for me, black pepper is very much the long game of foods.
Oh, do you not like black pepper?
No, I love the long game. No, I don't like black pepper.
I like both black pepper and the long game.
Whoa. I don't think we can go any further than that. That's the darkest opinion. Next time on Always Foolish, fear her.
Fear her.
Oh boy, we're starting strong. I appreciate a bit of a U-turn, but hey, I've got places to be. I've got to go possess some bodies.
And I've got to go and have a crisis of rationality where I start thinking, what should my next novel be? What if it's actually just zombies? Just
zombies. Not even anything else. It's called Just Zombies by Charles Dickens.
Yeah. It is, it's the great historical tragedy at the end of this episode is that Charles Dickens does not then go and write World War Z, which I think would have been a real evolution of
I
his
love
style.
that you pronounced it World War Z, not World War Z. Even though I think the guy that wrote it is English, so it is World War Z.
Well, also I'm going to call it World War Z, no matter who wrote it.
Would he put a character in it, though, played by Peter Capaldi? He would say, brackets, this will be played by actor Peter Capaldi, close brackets, who is a Who Doctor. Would it?
Would they
do that?
Charles Dickens.
Would Charles Dickens do that, do you think?
Yeah,
he's met the Doctor, and he will think, do you know who'd be great to play this guy I just met in real life?
Yeah, an actor that won't exist
that's not been born
2,000
years.
Yeah.
How long did you say?
I think I said 2,000. I think I meant 200, but
2,000 years.
Yeah,
Charles...
listen, as a historian, I can confidently say the 19th century is longer ago than people think.
It's been the normal amount of years, and then the last year has felt like 1,800 years.
Yeah.
Yes, you can follow us on the Stupid Bird or Stupid X app, whatever it is today, at Foolish Always, and you can also find the next episode right here in your subscription boxes, assuming you're subscribed. If you haven't, please do subscribe. Please like and rate the show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It will really help the show. And yes, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, and
Goodbye.
Goodbye.